It's time for the Newsmaker Show on News Talk AM 1480 WLEA.
Good morning, Brian O'Neill on the Newsmaker Show. State Senator Kathy Young coming up in segment 2. State Senator Tom O'Mara in segment 1. Senator O'Mara, I want to thank you very much for joining us. The Doran family wanted to express their thanks that you and Deputy Mayor John Buckley canceled that town hall, which was scheduled for Saturday morning during the same time as the funeral for Kevin Doran. Thank you so much.
Well, that's the least we could do, Brian, and my condolences to you and your family. Your father is certainly a legend in the whole region and well beyond Hornell in the broadcast world. What just a tremendous career, and so much he's added to the community, and his astuteness and involvement in politics over the years has been truly refreshing for our community as a whole.
Again, Senator, Ken, thank you, and Hornell Republican leader and Deputy Mayor Alderman John Buckley enough. State Board of Regents head Merrill Tisch is stepping down in March. She says she's not running for re-election there. Senator Merrill Tisch has been running the Board of Regents since 1996. That means she was largely involved with the rollout of Common Core. Wondering, Senator O'Mara, does this announcement from the State Board of Regents head Merrill Tisch have anything to do with her handling of Common Core? Could it be pressure from the government or the governor or anyone else to step down? Your thoughts, Senator O'Mara?
I'm sure that has a lot to do in her factoring in of retiring. However, she's been there for 20 years, leading the Board of Regents as chancellor for a long time. Certainly, Common Core has had an impact on everyone involved in the Regents. It's a truly, unfortunately, disastrous rollout of this new standard. So I think that certainly must have weighed heavily in her decision-making. But, she is staying until March, until the term is up, and then someone new will come in, and hopefully someone with a fresh look and approach to exactly where we're going to go in New York State with our standards and with our testing. We really, this Common Core really brought the testing, which testing's been complained about forever. The generic standardized tests has really brought to the forefront the discussion about all these things, and the rollout of this has just been truly a disaster. And the combination, which really made it even more difficult and I think impossible for the rollout, was trying to couple that with a new teacher evaluation system at the same time, tied to an exam that nobody had faith in, doesn't have any credibility in the teaching community. The parents quickly lost faith in that new standard and the approach to that, and it's been extremely problematic to do either one of those things. A new standard or a new teacher evaluation system on their own is a Herculean task. I think putting them together just spelled disaster for the whole thing.
Senator, it was a year or two ago, State Senator Kathy Young was on this station, and she told us that even though it was not really supposed to be that way, that it was in reality, even if it was not on paper. Former State Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, who called the shots when it came to who was going to be on the Board of Regents, wanted to ask you, Senator O'Mara, is it supposed to be the entire state legislature that decides the head of the Board of Regents, or is it, as they say, the three men in a room problem with the governor, the state Senate Majority Leader, and the Assembly Speaker? Who will decide who the next Board of Regents leader will be?
Well, the next Board of Regents leader, will be decided by the regents that are on there as far as who the chancellor is. The way that it's been controlled by Speaker Silver for so long is that the regents are elected by a session of the legislature as a whole. So both the Senate and the Assembly get together in a joint session, and each member has one vote. Now, there's 150 Assembly members, and there's 63 senators, so they outnumber the Senate more than 2-1. And while we have a very close majority-minority situation in the Senate, it's the opposite. It is 2-1, more than 2-1 Democrats to Republicans in the assembly. So that really gives the speaker and the assembly majority almost total control of who that vote, who's going to be elected as regents. And frankly, as being in the majority in the Senate, it has made no difference in what candidates are put forth. The assembly has controlled that because of their numbers outweighing it when it's a combined joint session. So that's really what's controlled that. And I think what most people don't understand is that while the regents are elected by the legislature as a whole, which is, as I said, dominated by the Assembly Democrat majority, that the regents and the education department in the state operate completely separately from any other agency in state government. The governor doesn't even have control over the education department or the regents and what they're doing and what they do. And that has been done that way forever because an attempt to keep politics out of education policy. However, that policy has been skewed over the years because of the downstate Democrat majority of the assembly being able to control who those regents are. So they've had a philosophical bent towards more urban education issues than they have on our more upstate and more rural districts.
Do you think, Senator, it'll be someone who is against Common Core, or will at the very least want to reform it, the new person who runs the State Board of Regents?
I don't think it will be someone that's outright opposed to Common Core. However, I do believe it will be a candidate that will be a strong reformer in the sense of making significant and major changes to Common Core, and particularly how that relates to teacher evaluations in the process. I think that is going to be a driving factor in whoever's going to push to become the chancellor of the regents that are there. But I do think it will be someone that will be strongly reform-minded in that way. And I think it has to be, because with the opt-out rates that we've seen of this Common Core test, it's appalling to see those opt-out numbers in excess of 20% statewide show you that there's a lack of confidence, to say the least, in the direction the State Board of Regents has gone with the Common Core and with the exam itself.
On the Monday Newsmaker show, we had on Congressman Chris Gibson, who's hoping to run for governor for the Republicans in 2018. And Congressman Gibson said that he did not think there would be an Astorino-Gibson primary. Rob Astorino told Fred Dicker on the Fred Dicker show on Monday morning that there probably won't be a primary on the GOP side in the governor's race. Senator O'Mara, sounds like maybe there's an agreement between the two, Astorino and Gibson, that for the good of the party, one will step aside if both of them want to run for governor. Is that what you get out of this?
Well, I think it's way too early to say that there's any kind of agreement like that's been discussed. I think they would both believe that probably for the betterment of their chances, whoever the candidate ultimately would be best to not go through a primary, which is certainly draining of resources for the statewide Republican Party in an effort like that. We had Chris Gibson at our Chemung County GOP dinner a week ago. He's going to be at the Steuben County GOP dinner coming up this Thursday night. So Chris Gibson's certainly going around the state and being very active, as has Rob Astorino. Rob Astorino with Chris Moss, we're up at the annual SCOPE dinner in the Buffalo area for the statewide SCOPE annual meeting. So they're still out there working, and I think that there will be a very, certainly will direct the agenda on what issues are going to be debated amongst the Republican candidates. But those are certainly two of the strong front runners right now, but 3 years away.
Talking with State Senator Tom O'Mara. Wanted to talk about that press conference you had in South Corning last week about highway funding and the CHIPS money, the Consolidated Highway Improvement money. Senator, this was a big thing with people like you and Assemblyman Phil Palmisano and Assemblyman Gillio and Congressman Tom Reed. And the concern was that, the downstate is getting a lot of funding from the state. What about upstate?
Well, that's the issue, and it's black and white. It is what it is. The governor came out and announced an agreement with New York City Mayor de Blasio that the state's going to come up with $8.3 billion for a 5-year capital plan for the MTA, the Metropolitan Transportation Authority, which provides all the mass transit in New York City, which is vitally important to the state as a whole, and particularly New York City. However, for decades, there's been a match of funding for upstate roads and bridges and culverts of state monies with a 5-year capital plan. The first time that was ever split was in the financial crisis we had starting in 2009, and the state went ahead with an MTA capital plan and did not put forth a 5-year capital plan at that time. While capital money was still authorized each year in the budget, there wasn't a 5-year plan to really put forth where we were going to head for 5 years, and it's just more difficult not knowing from year to year what you're going to be able to do as far as projects go, because they have to be planned so much in advance. So we're really making an effort, Phil Palmisano and I, in continuing this fight that we have for several years, and has resulted in increased CHIP funding over the last 3 years. But we really need to have a 5-year capital plan that takes into account our needs in upstate New York, because as important as MTA is in New York State, our local roads and bridges are vitally important to our livelihood, to our economy, to our safety, and our well-being and our transportation needs across upstate New York. And we have a lot of deficiencies in our roads and bridges that need attention, and the longer we wait, the more expensive they're going to be to fix.
Talking with State Senator Tom Omara. Senator, was there any local issues that you wanted to cover as far as Alstom goes, or maybe St. James?
Well, I mean, they're both sounding very promising with what's going on. I think I think there's still some loose ends to be tied up for the Alstom contracts as far as Amtrak is concerned, but hopefully things will be able to move forward with that. That's a couple years off anyways, but it's great news. These things take a long time coming together. And it sounds like the numbers and the activity of St. James with the U of R strong affiliation, it sounds like things are going very well.
Yes, and much thanks to the participation of so many people who got into saving the St. James situation, as well as working on Alstom. We've been talking with State Senator Tom Omara here on the Newsmaker Show. I'm Brian O'Neill. Our thanks to the Senator for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Brian. Have a great day.
You too, Senator, and stay with us. Coming up next, State Senator Kathy Young. Back with State Senator Kathy Young here in segment 2. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Senator Kathy Young, the big news from yesterday was that State Board of Regents head Merrill Tisch is stepping down. Now, from what I read in the New York Times, she's been there since 1996. And was the one who helped get Common Core through. The governor issued a statement about that, saying that, he praised the tenure of Merrill Tisch, but said he wants some big reforms to the state education curriculum and to the Common Core standards. He called her an extraordinary person, but says that, he wants some changes in Common Core. Your thoughts on that, Senator Young?
Well, I have to agree that we need to see some changes in Common Core, and obviously we need to have high educational standards and first-class quality education for our children. But at the same time, Common Core has been rife with issues ever since the Board of Regents and the State Education Department rolled it out. And Meryl Tisch has been the chancellor of New York State's Board of Regents. And, in New York State, we have kind of a different situation where the legislature is in charge of funding education, yet the educational policy actually comes from the Board of Regents. What's been a major flaw in the system for many, many years is that basically New York City politicians are the ones who choose who the Board of Regents are. And the reason I say that is that whenever an opening is up, it basically has been the Assembly Speaker that comes up with the candidate. And you can try to nominate somebody else, always fails. And the reason is that in New York State, we have 150 Assembly members, but the Assembly is heavily dominated by New York City. In the Senate, we have 33 members in our Republican conference. There are a total of 63 senators in all, but for every legislator, there's only one vote. So even though the Assembly members have districts that are much smaller than the Senate districts, they represent about 125, 130,000 people. In the Senate, we each represent about 300,000 people. But the weight of our votes is all the same. So when you add it all up, the legislators from New York City control who gets on the Board of Regents. And I just don't think that's right. I think it should be weighted vote. It should be based on the number of people in your district. And that way we could get, I think, a better balance of priorities on the Board of Regents that really match what we want and need upstate.
In the last segment, Senator Tom O'Mara spoke about the situation where the governor was not able to single-handedly appoint someone. He said, there's advantages to that by having more people involved. The problem is the Board of Regents. You indicate in your answer there that you'd like to see a Board of Regents with a little bit maybe different viewpoint on Common Core.
Right, and I just think overall, and we've seen it time and time again over the years in New York State, where it's more of a downstate agenda as far as education policy goes. And so in the way that the Board of Regents is selected, it's just heavily controlled by the New York State Assembly Speaker. And as you know, we've had issues with different speakers over the years. But really, with the Common Core rollout, it was such a mess from the beginning because it was totally disorganized. People were not ready. The teachers had not been trained well enough. The students and the parents weren't ready for it. And, the elements of it really were problematic. Things like over-testing and, giving kids as young as kindergarten age standardized form tests or bubble tests where they had to fill out the answer when they really were not to the point in their development where they could handle that kind of testing. And, children coming home, and we all heard the stories about them being sick to their stomachs, didn't understand things. So students were frustrated, parents were frustrated, teachers were frustrated, and it was a big mess. And so this year during legislative session, the Senate really led the way to make some major reforms to Common Core. So, for example, we were able to pass laws that reduced over-testing of students. We were able to pass laws that said that the curriculum had to be age-appropriate. We also passed laws that said, for example, if a student has special needs, that needs to be taken into consideration with the testing. And we also passed a law that requires the state education department to do a review of the Common Core standards just overall because we had such deep concerns. And now that review process is going on, it just was launched by the state education department, and already they have about 4,500 answers from people who are responding and giving their input regarding Common Core. And frankly, that ability to give input should have been there at the very beginning instead of at this point. But at least now I think the public, the teachers, the parents will be able to give their viewpoint on what the educational standards actually should be.
Talking with State Senator Kathy Young. Senator Young, you've been doing a lot of work for breast cancer clinics in Cattaraugus and Allegheny counties. Can you bring us up to speed on what's going on there?
Well, there's going to be more of an outreach into the communities, which I think is extraordinarily important. At the same time, we're able to spread what we're doing now to Livingston County. And recently I held a forum for breast cancer survivors so that women, and frankly sometimes men get breast cancer also, it's more rare, but that women could come and give their, feedback about what happened to them when they were diagnosed, what kind of support systems were there. So it's not just the medical part of it, but it's the actual support about getting information, maybe having the ability to talk to other people who have gone through the same type of trauma. And so it was great because we actually had women from Steuben and Allegheny counties take part in that forum. They traveled to Dansville, and it was so helpful to be able to hear their stories firsthand, and I'm so glad that they were able to share, because now we can take that information and really start to beef up some of the, the outreach and the support systems that already exist. So it's been very, very valuable to be able to hear, it always is, people grassroots, people who have actually gone through that experience, and they share their experiences because they want to help other people. And so it was very beneficial, and I'm so glad that we can look at cancer services and cancer treatment more on a regional basis where we can share good information between the counties.
Talking about sharing information there, Senator, you're working on legislation where, and this is going to sound, people will be surprised that don't work in government, I think. From what I understand, you have to mail in the U.S. mail. You have to send out letters with the legislation to the local officials. When you're in Albany at the state capitol working on a bill or some legislation, and you want local officials to know about it, mayors, board members in cities, towns, and villages, and because of some loophole in the law, you cannot send it by email, and you're trying to change that, Senator. Tell us about that.
Well, actually, we went paperless in the state legislature this past year, and really it was a big success. And we need to have the laws catch up with technology. So right now, if you serve in a local government, say a county legislature or a town or village board, if you have proposed local laws, you have to mail them through the U.S. mail, and they cannot be delivered electronically or via email. So that just seemed kind of silly in this day and age. And this actually was a request from one of my local governments. The town of Portville came to me a couple of years ago and said, this is crazy. We want to be able to use technology. It's going to make us more efficient. It's going to save taxpayer money. And that's really what it's all about, is making sure that local governments could have those kinds of cost savings. And so I drafted legislation. Assemblyman Joe Giglio, who also represents Allegheny County and part of Steuben County, was one of the prime sponsors of the legislation in the Assembly. And so we worked together to get it passed, and it passed both houses this year, which is great news. And now it's going to the governor for his signature, and I'm really hoping that he will sign it. I can't see any reason why he wouldn't do it, because I think it passes all the elements of good policy. But so we'll wait and see what happens.
Okay, we've been talking with State Senator Kathy Young here on the Newsmaker Show. I did have a question. The State Senate is having a special election to fill the Tom Libis seat for Binghamton and that area. That was a key seat, and Tom Libis was the number 2 man in the State Senate at that time under Dean Skelos. Wondering, Senator, you help with the Republican elections. With the elections that are coming up next year for the Senate Republicans in 2016, will the Binghamton seat have any effect on that? And do you have any plans for the upcoming 2016 election you can tell us about?
Well, first of all, the special election, even though it's a special election, it has been folded into this year's regular election, which is November 3rd. So I would encourage everybody listening to vote. They won't be able to vote in that special election, but we have a lot of local races that are very important. And I always say to people, I just want to remind people to go out and exercise their right to vote. But we do have the special election. It's very important. It's very important to the people of New York State. and I believe it's very important to the people of upstate. The seat needs to be filled in a timely way because we'll be starting session again in January. We want to make sure that we have all the legislators on board and every seat is filled. This is really important to people upstate, too, because the Senate Republican Conference brings balance to New York State government. And if we were not in the majority, as we are now, you would have downstate New York City controlling every aspect of state government. And the last time we saw that happen, it was an unmitigated disaster where the Senate was controlled in 2009 and 10 by the Senate Democrats. The State Assembly was heavily controlled by New York City, and the governor was Governor Patterson from New York City. And as a result, we had $14 billion in tax hikes, we had uncontrolled spending, we had job losses, we had our upstate money for roads and bridges and economic development and our schools being cut and diverted to New York City. So we can't let that happen again. And that's why this election in the 52nd Senate District is so crucial, because if the Senate Republicans don't win, then we get one step closer to having New York City control the Senate again, and we're just not going to let that happen. So I feel really great about our candidate. His name is Fred Akshar. He's the undersheriff in Broome County, and by the way, this Senate district is quite large. It goes into Broome and Tioga counties, Shenango County, and so it has a lot of rural area in it. And my point is that it's very similar, because it's a southern tier district, very similar to our region, and the people who live in that district have the same concerns. Things like tax relief and property tax relief especially. They're concerned about job growth and economic growth. They're concerned about having proper funding for our schools. And so, as a result, those are the things that we're messaging about, and the public is responding so well to our candidate because the public knows how critically important it is to make sure that those issues are addressed.
I had one final question for you, Senator, and we're down to just a minute and a half. I want to throw a scenario out to you. I don't see it ever happening, but what if it did? What if upstate, all the assemblymen and all the state senators were Democrats? Because you talked about New York City having control. If the Democrats had total control of upstate, what would happen?
Well, they still would be controlled by New York City, because the power centers for the Democratic Party and the money actually comes from New York City. And that's where the political bosses all are from. So if you noticed, the people who are in charge for the Senate Democrats, downstate person, the people in charge of the state assembly is Carl Hastie. He's the assembly speaker. He's from the Bronx. And just because of the population and how it's structured, New York City would control everything. And that's why it's so important to have the Senate be in Republican hands, because we do bring that balance. We bring that focus on upstate and, the rest of the state outside of New York City. And that way we can protect our districts and make sure that we get all of the funding that is due to us, that we can stop a lot of their very radical policies, because we see all kinds of policies emanating from New York City that hurt the taxpayers. And it really has to be our top concern to protect the taxpayers and grow more jobs in New York State, and that's what we stand for.
State Senator Kathy Young, it's always great having you on. By the way, apologies for the hum, the little phone line noise. That's kind of a local issue with the phone company. They're working on it. We hope to have that taken care of in the next couple of days. Senator, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Brian. Take care.